My husband had a secret second family for 11 years. I found out by accident. What I did next took 6 months to plan. My husband had a secret second family for 11 years. I found out by accident. I spent 6 months building a trap before I did anything at all. What happened next destroyed everything he had built and gave me everything I never knew I wanted. I want to start by telling you about the kind of marriage we had, because I think it matters. Marcus and I met when we were both 26 years old at a work event neither of us particularly wanted to attend. He was funny and quick and paid attention in a way that felt rare. I fell in love with him over the course of about 3 months and married him 2 years later in a small ceremony in the countryside with 40 people and a lot of good food, and the genuine conviction that I had made the right choice. We were happy. I am not saying that to make what comes later more dramatic. I am saying it because it is true and because I think it is important for you to understand that I was not a woman who had been unhappy for years and was looking for a reason to leave. I was genuinely happy, which made everything that followed so much harder to process. We built a life that felt solid. A house that we bought together and renovated slowly over several years, one room at a time. A dog named Francis who slept on the end of the bed and made us both laugh every single day. A group of friends who came to dinner and stayed too late and sent us voice notes during the week. Holidays in the summer and weekends away in autumn and Christmas with his family and mine, alternating every year. The ordinary texture of a marriage that is working. That is what we had. Or what I believed we had. The question of children came up twice in 11 years. Once early, when I raised it lightly and he said he was not sure he was ready, and I said okay because we were young and there was no urgency. And once 4 years later, when I raised it more seriously and he sat across from me and said he was not sure he wanted them at all. And I said I needed to think about that, and then I thought about it for several months and decided that the life we had was full enough, and that I loved him enough, and that I loved him enough, and that I was willing to let that particular door close. I made my peace with it. I genuinely did. What I did not know, at any point during those 11 years, was that Marcus had a daughter. Her name is Lily. She was 6 years old when I found her photograph in his car that Sunday afternoon in September. Which means she was born during our marriage. Which means that somewhere in the second year of our life together, while we were renovating the kitchen and arguing gently about paint colors and going on a holiday to Greece, that I still have photos of on my phone, Marcus was having a child with another woman. I have thought many times about the moment I found that photograph and what it must have looked like from the outside. A woman standing in a car park holding a small piece of card. Not moving, not crying, just standing. The neighbor across the road told me months later that she had looked out of her window and seen me there and wondered if I was all right. I was not all right, but I was also not falling apart. What I was doing in that car park holding that photograph was making a decision. I put it back exactly where I found it. I went inside. I made the pasta I'd been planning to make. Marcus came home at 7 and we ate dinner together and watched something on television, and I asked him about his day and he told me and I told him about mine, and then we went to bed and I lay in the dark next to him, listening to him breathe, and I thought about the gap-toothed smile on the back of that photograph and the 3 words in the handwriting I did not recognize in the titograph, and the 3 words in the handwriting I did not recognize, and I decided that I was going to find out everything before I did a single thing. The first week was the hardest because I had to act normal without knowing enough to know what normal even meant anymore. I did not know if this was old or recent. I did not know if it was ongoing. I did not know if he loved her or if she was a mistake he had been paying for ever since or something in between. I needed information before I could make any decisions about what to do with it. I started with his phone. Marcus was not careless with it, but he was not paranoid either. He did not have a passcode that he had changed recently or hide the screen when I walked past. He trusted me in the way that people trust someone when they believe they have successfully hidden the thing that would make trust irrelevant. I had known his passcode for years. I used it one evening while he was in the shower, and I had 11 minutes, and I used them well. The contact was saved as Paul Whitmore. We did not know a Paul Whitmore. I had met every significant person in Marcus's life over 11 years, and Paul Whitmore was not one of them. The messages were careful, which told me that Marcus had thought about the possibility of someone finding them. They used first names only. They talked about logistics. Times and dates framed as questions. Never anything explicit. But there were 11 years of messages in that thread, and even careful messages, read in enough volume, tell you things. I saw enough to know that this was not casual and not old and not ending. Then I heard the shower turn off and I put his phone back and I sat down on the sofa, and I picked up my own phone and I did not let my hand shake until he came back into the room. Over the next 2 weeks, I found the other things. The second phone was the most significant discovery, not because of what was on it, but because of what it told me about him. You do not buy a second prepaid phone for something casual. You buy it for something you intend to sustain. I found it in a bag on the floor of his wardrobe, under a jumper he almost never wore. I did not touch it. I noted where it was and left it there. The savings account I found through a letter that had been redirected to our address by mistake, or what I initially assumed was a mistake. It was from a bank we did not use together. The name on the letter was Marcus. The account number was not one I recognized. I photographed the letter and put it back in the pile. Later, I understood that the letter was not a mistake. It had been sent to our address because Marcus had listed our address as his primary address, which was the truth, and this account as a secondary account, which he had presumably forgotten about or assumed would never produce paper correspondence. The savings account had been opened 11 years ago. There were regular deposits going back to the beginning. The amounts were modest individually, but added up to something significant over time. It was, I eventually understood, the account from which he funded the other life. The rent, the school fees, because Lily was in private school, I found that out later. The holidays and the birthdays and the ordinary expenses of a family of 3 living in a flat, 20 minutes from our house. 20 minutes. I have thought about that a lot. 20 minutes was how long it took him to drive from one life to the other. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings when he said he was at the gym. On some Saturday mornings when he said he was playing golf with a colleague. On the occasional Sunday afternoon when he said he was popping to the hardware store or visiting an old friend or any of the 100 small plausible excuses that accumulate over 11 years into something that should have felt like a pattern, but that I had never looked at long enough to see as one. I spent those first 3 weeks building a picture. I did not look for anything on the internet because I did not have enough information yet, and I did not want to stumble into something that would require me to react before I was ready. I watched him. I listened to his phone calls when I could do so naturally. I paid attention to the small moments where the edges of the two lives brushed against each other and he had to manage the join. The Tuesday evenings when he came home from the gym without having sweated. The way he always showered when he came in, which I had assumed was habit. The phone calls he took in another room that he explained as work calls and that I had never questioned because why would I? After 3 weeks, I knew enough to know that I needed help and that the help I needed was not emotional support. I called a friend who is a solicitor, not to cry to her and not to ask her what she thought I should do. I called her to ask her a specific question, which was this: if I were to divorce my husband on the grounds of adultery, what would I need and how long would it take and what would I get? She answered my questions. Then she asked me if I was all right. I said I was fine. She said I did not sound fine. I said I was going to be. The picture that emerged over the following weeks was this. Her name was Claire. She was 34 years old. She had met Marcus at a conference 12 years ago before we were married, and they had been together in some form since then. When Marcus and I married, she did not end things. When she became pregnant, she told him and he did not leave me. What he did instead was construct a parallel arrangement that allowed him to maintain both. He paid for her flat. He spent 2 evenings a week there and some weekend time. He was present at the birth of their daughter and at her first birthday, and at every Christmas I was not there to observe. He had told Claire that his marriage was complicated and essentially over and that he was working toward leaving. He had been telling her this, I later found out, for 9 years. I want to be very specific about the 6 months that followed my discovery, because I think the specifics matter. I did not spend those 6 months being sad. I was sad, certainly, in the way that I think any person would be when a foundational belief about their life turns out to be false. I grieved the marriage I thought I had, and I grieved the version of Marcus I had loved, and I grieved the lost years and the children I had chosen not to have, partly because of a conversation with a man who had a child he had never mentioned. All of that was real and all of it hurt, but what I was doing during those 6 months, underneath the grief, was building something. I started with the financials. I hired a forensic accountant discreetly through a firm my solicitor recommended. She spent 8 weeks tracing the full extent of Marcus's financial arrangements. The savings account was the visible part. There was more underneath it. A small investment account, a property owned in the company name that linked back to Marcus through 2 intermediaries. The flat where Claire and Lily lived was not rented. It was owned. Marcus owned it through a shell structure that had taken him, my accountant estimated, the better part of a decade to build correctly. The total value of the assets I had not known about was substantial. Not enormous, but substantial. Enough that it changed the financial picture of the divorce significantly. My solicitor and I had a series of meetings over those 6 months that I think of now as the planning sessions. We talked about timing and strategy and what I wanted the outcome to look like. I was very clear with her about what I wanted. I did not want to hurt Claire. She had been told a version of the truth that was designed to keep her in place, and she had believed it, and I had no interest in causing her additional pain on top of what she was inevitably going to experience. I did not want to destroy Marcus. I wanted a clean exit, a fair financial settlement that accounted for the hidden assets, and my life back in a form I could build something from. What I wanted, specifically, was the house. The house was in both our names. Marcus had paid more toward it initially, but I had covered a disproportionate share of the renovation costs from my own savings, and the mathematics of the contribution, properly calculated, were closer to even than he probably appreciated. My solicitor was confident about the house. She was also confident about the investment account and less confident about the property structure, but thought we could make a strong argument. The thing I spent the most time on in those 6 months was not legal or financial. It was the question of Claire. I had thought about her constantly since I found the photograph. I had thought about what she knew, and what she had been told, and what the experience of her life had actually been. Raising a child in a flat owned by a man who spent most of his time elsewhere and kept telling her he was going to leave his wife. I had felt angry at her, and then I had felt sad for her, and then I had stopped feeling anything in particular about her and started thinking about her practically, which is what I usually do when I have processed something enough to move forward. I decided to contact her before I filed anything. Not to be kind, although I did want to be kind to her, but because I thought she deserved to know the truth before Marcus had any opportunity to control the narrative. If I filed without telling her first, Marcus would find out and he would call her, and he would give her a version of events that served him, and she would make decisions based on that version. I wanted her to make decisions based on actual facts. I wrote her a letter. Not an email, which can be forwarded and screenshotted and shared easily. A letter, typed and printed and addressed to her directly at the flat that I now knew was owned by my husband. I told her who I was. I told her that I knew about Lily and about their arrangement and about the financial structure. I told her that I was filing for divorce and that Marcus was shortly going to become aware of this, and that I wanted her to know before he did. I told her that I had no interest in making her situation worse than it already was going to be, and that if she wanted to speak to me, she could call the number at the bottom of the page. She called 3 days later. The conversation was 47 minutes long, and it was one of the most unusual conversations I have ever had. We were both very calm. I think we were both in shock in different ways. She told me things I had not known, and I told her things she had not known. And by the end of the call, we both had a much clearer picture of what 11 years of Marcus had actually looked like. He had told her our marriage was a formality. He had told me he was not ready for children. He had told her he was working on leaving. He had told neither of us the truth about almost anything. She cried at some point in the middle of the call. I did not. I had been crying privately for 6 months, and I had run out of tears by the time we spoke. I told her I was sorry for what she was going through. She said the same to me. We ended the call, and I sat for a long time in the kitchen of the house that I had spent 4 years renovating, and I thought about the strange mathematics of 2 women who had both been deceived by the same man, sitting on the phone together, being polite to each other, and then I poured myself a glass of wine and I called my solicitor and I told her I was ready. We filed on a Thursday morning. Marcus found out that same afternoon through his own solicitor. He called me on my mobile at 4:30 in the afternoon. I did not answer. He came home at 6, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and my solicitor had told me exactly what to do in this moment, which was to say very little and to listen. He sat down across from me at the table where we had eaten 11 years of meals, and he said a lot of things. Some of them were apologies, and some of them were explanations, and some of them were things that I think he intended as justifications, but that did not land as such. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I told him that I was aware of the savings account and the investment account and the property structure and the forensic accountant's report. The color left his face in a way I had never seen on another person's face before, and hope not to see again. The divorce took 11 months from filing to finalization. Marcus contested several things initially, and then stopped contesting them after his solicitor presumably explained to him what contesting them was going to involve in terms of the financial disclosure he would be required to make. We settled without going to court. I got the house. I got a financial settlement that my solicitor described as very good. I got Francis the dog, who had never particularly liked Marcus anyway. Claire and Lily moved out of the flat 6 months after the divorce was finalized, when it became clear that Marcus could not continue to fund both it and his own new accommodation and the divorce settlement simultaneously. I do not know where they went. I heard through an intermediary that Claire had family in another part of the country and had gone there. I hope she is all right. I hope Lily is all right. I think about Lily sometimes, about the gap-toothed girl in the school photograph, and I feel something complicated and sad that I do not entirely have the language for. Marcus, as far as I know, is renting a flat somewhere. He called me once after the divorce was finalized. I did not answer. He sent me a message that I read and did not reply to. I have thought about what I might say to him if I were ever in a room with him again, and the honest answer is that I do not think I have anything to say. Not because of the anger, which I have mostly processed, but because I cannot think of a single thing he could tell me that I do not already know, and that would be of any use. I am 39 years old. I live in the house I spent 4 years renovating with a man who was living a double life in a flat 20 minutes away. I have redecorated 2 rooms since he left, and I am planning a third. Francis sleeps on the end of the bed. I have been promoted twice in the 2 years since the divorce. I am seeing someone, very cautiously, who knows the whole story and has responded to it with a kind of steady patience that I find I appreciate enormously. I do not know what that will become. I am not in a rush. What I want to say, at the end of all of this, is something that I think is true and that took me a long time to believe. The life I have now is better than the life I had. Not because of what Marcus did. His choices were not a gift to me. But the process of dismantling what we had built and building something entirely my own has produced a version of my life that feels more genuinely mine than anything I had before. I know what I want now in a way that I did not when I was 26 and falling in love with a funny man at a work event. I know what I will not accept. I know what I am capable of. I spent 6 months building a trap for a man who thought he was untouchable, and I did it carefully and methodically, and it worked. And that knowledge about myself has turned out to be one of the most useful things I own. He did not see it coming. He should have.